What's up guys, today we're going to be talking about playstyles, or more accurately, team archetypes. Technically, a playstyle is how a team is used in practice, and an archetype is how a team is structured. You could play a stall team, the bulkiest archetype, like it's a hyper offense, the most offensive archetype, but it wouldn't go very well. That's why playstyle and archetype are often used interchangeably in the Pokemon community, because there's generally an optimal playstyle associated with each archetype. That being said, just to be clear, we are discussing archetypes today, things like stall, hyper offense, balance, etc. I've seen so many players and viewers get confused or perplexed over what playstyle their team is or what it should be. They say things like, pink across, I tried to make an offense team but it turned out as more of a balance, and things like that. In reality, many archetype distinctions are blurry and unnecessary to building and battling. There are really only three distinct categories you need to understand: stall, hyper offense, and everything in between, which we'll call the balance umbrella. Stall is unique because it almost entirely gives up on offensive firepower. It relies solely upon small damage like status conditions, hazards, and low damaging moves to win the game. A good stall team will sacrifice breaking power for superior defenses. A good stall team will also have a well-arranged series of Pokemon that optimize the team's chances to win slowly, but the emphasis is on defense. The best stall teams will frequently face matchups where they cannot do any meaningful damage to the opponent, but in such matchups, the hope is that the opponent can't break your team either, and yours is designed to last the longest. Hyper Offense is unique because it's the only playstyle that involves sacking Pokemon as part of the standard game plan. This is the hard line drawn between hyper offense and offense. A hyper offense intends to lose sweepers in order to win the game. Pokemon like Roaring Moon, for example, are meant to die. Offense, although it will often have to sack Pokemon in practice, will not have any Pokemon that are designed to die. Everything else functions in basically the same way, just on a spectrum. You use bulkier supporting Pokemon to enable your more offensive or powerful Pokemon to break. The difference is to what degree you do these things, and that's where we get all these different classifications of balance teams. All of these different classifications fundamentally function in the same way. A bulky balance team may have 4 defensive Pokemon and 2 offensive Pokemon, and an offensive team may have 4 offensive Pokemon and 2 defensive Pokemon. Still, there's no hard line between how these two archetypes function. So why do I draw these hard lines and separate all good teams into these 3 categories? It comes down to 2 factors: intention to break and intention to let Pokemon be KO'd or sacked. If a team intends to let Pokemon be KO'd and intends to break, it's hyper offense. If a team doesn't intend to break or sack Pokemon, it is stall. If a team intends to break but not let Pokemon be KO'd, it is under the balance umbrella, going all the way from semi-stall to offense. And if a team intends to let Pokemon be KO'd but not break, it's just a terrible team that will lose all the time. Let's take a look at some successful teams that clearly show these lines. First up, let's take a look at this famous Hydrapple stall. If you look at this team, you notice this Hydrapple, not designed to break, definitely not this Blissey, not this Dondozo, no, and no. Nothing on this team is designed to really pack a punch. Now, you do have things that are designed to slowly make progress, right? Like Hydrapple does have a fairly reasonable base special attack. You've got Poison Sting for status on Clodsire, Poison Jab and Knockoff on Gliscor, Spikes on Gliscor, Stealth Rock on Blissey, but nothing on this team is made to break. It's great if it does, but most balanced teams are going to be able to wall this for many turns, and you're okay with that. That's why you have other backup plans. Things like PP stall, that's why you're running a 56 PP move like Poison Sting. But yeah, the plan here is not to break. Now we compare this with a famous semi-stall, and we see something very different. Now, you have a lot of the same Pokemon, a lot of hazards, and a lot of unaware Pokemon, a lot of bulk, but we have a Meowscarada here, and it's only one. You might say, well, this looks really similar to Stall, but it's actually quite different, because so you've got this Stealth Rock Clefable, Spikes Gliscor, a Future Sight Glow King with Chilly Reception, and then this Meowscarada here with 4 attacks, max attack investment, and Protean. This combination of Pokemon, Hazards plus Knock Meowscarada to remove boots plus Future Sight support, is very, very good at getting past any defensive core. So this team just intends to have the bulk to last long enough to let Meowscarada do its job, not forever, and it has an intention to break. It is meant to bust open defensive cores, and that is a huge difference. Now, looking at the difference between hyper offense and offense, let's take a look at this HO team. So we've got this Rabombi. Is this meant to die? Absolutely. Get Sticky Webs up, die. This Glamora, is it meant to die? Yes. You Meteor Beam, you switch out. You don't switch out. You Meteor Beam, you're in, right? You've got this Power Herb. It's a one-time use item. You are in. Manaphy, frequently you're not going to switch this out either, right? You set up Tail Glow, you do damage, you die. Zamazenta, same situation. This thing has a temporary ability. You're either going for the win or you're dying if you're bringing this in. You're typically not going to switch Zamazenta out. Even this Recover Gholdengo, oftentimes it probably would be worth just letting it go down, since nothing on this team is good at switching into really any attack. And then you've got Roaring Moon here. Once again, a classic example of a Pokemon meant to die. You switch this out, you bring it in, it's a lot weaker because of booster energy. Generally, you switch in Roaring Moon, that will be its last time on the battlefield as well as its first time. Now looking at an offense team, we have no recovery moves on this entire team. Even the Sticky Web team had a Recover Gholdengo. Now we do have Regenerator, which some would consider recovery, but if we look here, this is for the most part an offensive team. We've got kind of a 2-mon defensive core, but the rest of this is designed to really just put on offensive pressure. So what's the difference between this and hyper offense? Well, you are not meant to sack these Pokemon. You want to preserve their life. And you can see that in the way this team is constructed. First of all, we do have this defensive core here, which the Hyper Offense didn't have, but also we have a lot of pivoting moves, which makes it easier for these offense teams to switch, since it is harder to switch into attacks the more offensive your team gets, and the less bulky, right? We've got Chilly Reception here, U-turn Lando, U-turn Cinderace, so you see these differences. This is a team that is not designed to sack Pokemon, and that makes all the difference when you compare this to hyper offense. If you're wondering where stuff like Rain or Sun or Sticky Web is, these are all sub-archetypes that fall into various categories. For example, Rain and Sun are typically offense and Sticky Web is typically hyper offense. I'm not going to discuss any sub-archetypes in this video, just the major archetype categories. Before I continue, I want to remind you all that your final exam in Building and Battling 101 is coming up in about a month. Subscribe for an additional 5 points, and given the pass-fail rate of this class, I think those 5 points could be a big deal. Now, also before we go on, I want to clarify that just because there are no hard lines between semi-stall and offense, and they all fall under that balance umbrella, it doesn't mean there aren't differences to consider when building and playing on this spectrum. The main one is going to be game length, which influences a lot of other factors. Bulkier teams are generally going to produce longer games. They can stop sweepers with walls, but because of those longer games, it means their checks and counters must be more solid, but switching in to take hits is more manageable, which makes momentum and not having any passive Pokemon not as big of a deal. More offensive teams will have shorter games. They'll have to stop sweepers with offensive pressure. Checks and counters can be temporary, and pivoting moves and momentum and not having passive Pokemon in general is a lot more important due to this game length. A great way to illustrate this difference is to look at Landorus and Gliscor. Both are commonly used on teams in this balanced range, but Landorus is typically used on more offensively inclined teams, while Gliscor is typically used on more defensively inclined teams on this spectrum. Landorus offers a lot of what offense needs. More bulk in the short term due to Intimidate, despite not being able to wall threats as long as Gliscor. It also doesn't have to run Protect like Gliscor, allowing Landorus to fit U-turn easier. And as we discussed, pivoting moves are very helpful for offensively inclined teams. On the other hand, bulkier teams will want a more reliable switch into threats like Raging Bolt, Kingambit, and Heatran, making Gliscor a better option. Gliscor can switch into these threats many times, whereas Landorus can typically only do so once or twice. Keep in mind that these rules I'm discussing apply only in the range of semi-stall to offense. Hyper offense and stall break a lot of rules typically associated with the spectrum, which is why I draw a hard line between hyper offense, stall, and the archetypes you see here. There are many other smaller factors that are different as well of teams on this spectrum, such as temporary items like booster energy and air balloon being more acceptable to run on more offensive teams. A temporary item goes well with a shorter game since you won't suffer the consequence of that item being gone as long as you would in a drawn out game. Another example is that removal such as Cinderace Court Change is typically better on offensive teams rather than bulky teams, since Court Change is often stronger in shorter games where the opponent won't have a chance to reset hazards or will lose a lot of momentum doing so. Now you know about the 3 main archetypes, but what does this mean for you? How will this concept help make you a better player? So this concept is most helpful in team building, and the big lesson is to not worry about whether your team is a bulky offense balance or bulky balance when you're building. Let the team go where it wants to go, add the Pokemon that seem like they would fit well, and as long as you don't stray across the lines of hyper offense Pokemon or stall Pokemon, you're going to be okay. If you do cross these lines though, you'll be in big trouble. Having Pokemon that you're meant to sack, like Roaring Moon, along with balanced Pokemon that aren't meant to be sacked, or even worse, alongside passive stall Pokemon like Dondozo on the same team, is a recipe for disaster. When I tell someone their team is bad because they're mixing playstyles, this is what I mean. They've crossed those lines within the same team. You still should consider the small difference we discussed caused by differences in game length. You don't want to put a Cinderace as your only removal if you're running a hazard-weak bulky balance. That being said, if you're stressing out about whether a team is a bulky balance or a bulky offense, it really doesn't matter. If the team is defensively and offensively comfortable with the length of games it typically generates, and it performs well in testing, you don't have to worry about it being a particular archetype. The purpose of all these classifications, like bulky offense, bulky balance, semi-stall, is just to offer additional ways to sort balanced teams since it makes up such a large portion of teams created. It doesn't mean anything significant about how the team should be built or played. Good luck in your team building and battling, and remember, you really only need to worry about 3 archetypes. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time.